I'm Walter Jaffe. I'm an American, but I live in the Netherlands, in Leiden, and I work at Leiden University. And I'm 70 years old, and I'm semi-retired, but I really keep doing the same things that I did when I was younger, but more slowly. In astronomy, I do all kinds of things. I started in Leiden as a radio astronomer, and I learned what's called interferometry there. And in the meantime, I've worked in Leiden, I've worked in the United States, and now I'm back at Leiden. I started mostly studying radio galaxies, active galactic nuclei in clusters of galaxies, and I still do that to some extent, or at least active galaxies, but I've shifted from radio astronomy to optical and infrared astronomy, and in some sense I'm more a technical astronomer. I enjoy using equipment and understanding how new equipment goes. And in my own way, I compare it with, as a child, I enjoyed putting bicycles together. You could get wrenches and nuts, and you took things out of a box and you put them together. And to a certain extent, I feel I'm still doing the same thing. And my specific expertise in instrumental astronomy is data reduction, understanding how you can look at the very complicated things that come out of the instruments and get exactly what you want out of them. And then it doesn't really matter so much which instrument it is. You learn to do this for all of them. And for the same thing, because I'm now involved in building a new instrument called Matisse, which I'm sure you've talked about with the other astronomers, I use it to look at active galaxies. I don't know if you have followed this, but this is where material is falling on a black hole in the center of a galaxy. But the people I work with are also looking at planets and stars, so I've learned what's going on there too. So I don't see myself much as a specialist. And this is a bit strange in modern astronomy, because it's so complicated now that people tend to just pick one thing and say, okay, I'm the expert at that. If you look at the beginning of the 20th century, there were astronomers who knew everything about astronomy. And really, in the period that I was an astronomer, you've shifted from astronomers who knew something about everything to specialists who only know a very small region very well. And I don't feel too comfortable in that region, but that's the way things go. And I've been observing and going to strange places to do astronomy since about 1968. In many cases, they're mountains, like we are now in Paranal. In many cases, they're deserts. I worked at what's called the Very Large Array, which is a radio telescope in New Mexico, and that is not, well, it's almost as high as here, but it's not mountains. It's just a flat plateau at about 2,500 meters. And it's not quite as dry and desolate as Paranal, but it's the same thing. But I've also worked on telescopes in Hawaii, where the tops of the mountains look like here, but when you go down to the ground, it's a jungle, it's a tropical paradise. And the main thing, of course, of all of these places is that you're isolated from your family, and you're together with other people doing the same thing for usually a few weeks at a time. And that's very exciting for a short term, but it's very tiring after several weeks. And you're interested in working in extreme environments, and yet on the other hand, ESO and the other observatories I've worked at go out of their way to make you comfortable. So the hotel here is a hotel, and the food is fairly good, and the bed is fairly good, and the air conditioning is good. So you don't actually feel it's so extreme. It would be very different if you had to sleep in a tent and go up to the telescope in the morning, but that's not the way it is. And even the operations, we sit in a room and we look at computer screens all night, and this is basically what we do in Leiden or in Europe too. In the very old days, when I first started as an astronomer, you had to go up to the telescope and sit in the telescope in the cold with the mosquitoes all night. And that disappeared 30 years ago. So you feel much less of a pioneer than you used to do. So actually, it isn't much different from sitting in Leiden and sitting in front of my terminal there, except that there's fewer diversions and other things to do. It's also characteristic of the kind of astronomy we do now that you don't actually know typically what you've discovered while you're here. You collect thousands of megabytes, many gigabytes of data while you're here, and often you don't understand what's in it until you go back to your home institute and work for another 2 or 3 months. It's nice to work with people that you get along with well and working on a common goal. I make a distinction among astronomers. There are many people who are, let's say, theoreticians or other kinds of astronomers, and the field is very competitive now. It's very difficult to get jobs, and the younger people are trying to discover things, write papers, make a big name for themselves. And I find I'm part of this. I'm very competitive myself. But I find it rather unpleasant that to get somewhere you have to push other people out of the way. And one of the nice things on working in instruments and building new instruments is that you're all trying to do the same thing. You're all trying to make the instrument work. And this creates an atmosphere which I like very much. Even the people who you might not like personally, you need each other in order to get the instrument to work right. And that's one of the reasons I've drifted into instrumental astronomy instead of say theory, because it's you work together, and I like that very much. And I've discovered, on the other hand, that if the organization is too big, you don't know everybody. People make decisions and tell you to do this. And I worked for the Space Telescope Institute for about 3 years, and there were 500 people there. And ESO is almost as big. And I've discovered I don't like at all to work in these large organizations. The ideal project is something where you have 10 or 15 or 20 people. So you get to know everybody, you get along well with everybody, and you have the same thing you want to do together. So now that I'm semi-retired, I'm pretty much restricting myself to only working in groups of about that size. But it's very difficult to be creative here, I find. You're too tired. The best ideas I have are the things that occur to me in the morning or under the shower or when I'm rested. And if you have things you have to do every day, take data, fiddle with the instrument, you don't have as many of these very good ideas. They only come when you go home and think, oh, why didn't I do that?